On today's Transport Evolved, Elon Musk gives away his secrets, quadricycle safety is put into question, and Hyundai says it's only making fuel cell vehicles because it needs ZEV credits. These stories and more coming up next on Transport Evolved. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 203 of Transport Evolved, recorded on Friday, the 6th of June 2014. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield. You will notice there is no Mr. Mark Chatterley today, and I shouldn't even be here either, but we have the most wonderful Mr. John Voelcker joining us instead to guide us through the week's news of electric vehicles. How are you today, John?
Delightful, and it's sunny in New York City and summer has finally arrived, so I'm happy. And while I won't be driving electric this weekend, I will be driving a 3-cylinder Ford Fiesta, so that's making me happy too.
Cool, excellent. I'm afraid I lost you completely there, but that was because my earpiece fell out. But I can hear you now.
Okay.
If for some reason today, my in-laws are visiting, I'm going to blame my mother-in-law, which is a British institution. If my earpiece falls out during the show, I'm getting intermittent signals. I was out of the studio for 1 week and things have stopped working, and I don't understand why, because nobody's been in the studio since I was last here. Just go away for 1 week and things fall apart. But thank you for joining us. You've got some great stories this week. I've got some great stories to discuss. So let's just bash on through with the beginning. The first story. A new world record was set this week for electric cars. 507 electric cars in a parade in Stuttgart at the Mercedes-Benz Museum, no less. All part of the World Advanced Vehicle Expedition, the Wave Trophy. We had as a guest a couple of weeks ago, Louis Palmer, the guy behind the Wave Trophy. So congratulations to Louis and everyone else. 507 vehicles, all electric. Now, I think the important thing here to point out is previous world record attempts that people have covered have included plug-in hybrid vehicles, but this one is the first, the new world record for 100% electric. So they have to be purely electric vehicles. That's astonishing. I have one question, though. How did they manage the charging?
That did rather strike me, too.
Yeah.
What's the answer?
I don't know. I think they just had massive numbers of charging at the location in Stuttgart. And a lot of the people who took part, obviously, were just there for the day. So some of them would have been local owners. I know that Mercedes-Benz helped out a great deal. And interestingly, they were hiring out their car-to-goes, their Smart for 2 electric drives, for the purposes of this world record attempt. And the really nice thing was, if you hired a car under the car-to-go scheme to take part in the event, you had your rental fee waived. So well done to Mercedes-Benz for supporting that. And what a great start to the World's Advanced Vehicle Expedition. They are now, I believe, they went over the Voelcker Pass yesterday, which is the one that was in one of the James Bond films, the one with that beautiful Aston Martin. I can't remember which one it was now. Goldfinger, I want to say. I think it was. So they went over the Voelcker Pass yesterday. Fantastic photographs of snow and EVs in the middle of the summer. I mean, of course, electric vehicles don't have to worry about problems going over mountain passes like petrol cars do they?
No, and certainly there's no combustion change due to altitude, although temperature has a bit of an effect. But no, I'm looking forward to seeing those pictures. I haven't yet.
Yeah, there are some on our site, and we've been getting them through on a fairly regular basis. So so that's great. And actually, I just want to say, some people have been sending us photographs of the event and some of the children that have been involved, because they've been visiting schools and things like that. Under various regulations, we're not allowed to publish photographs of children.
Oh
for
my.
child protection purposes. So if you've sent us those photographs and they're not appearing, that is why we've not put them up there, because we don't want to get into trouble from anyone for child protection purposes. You can put photos of your own kids up. You just have to get parental consent if you put other people's children on photographs in Europe. But let's talk about what went wrong, because as you know, we were supposed to go, Transport Evolved was supposed to go all the way to Stuttgart to take part in this event. We were supposed to take our Nissan Leaf. The first sort of 200 miles of the trip, 180 miles from our Bristol base all the way to Kent, where the Eurotunnel is, went flawlessly. We stopped at every Chademo quick charge station along the way. Every one of them worked. We arrived in Calais with a little range to spare, but then it went south. And this is an ongoing problem with electric car rapid chargers. The first one we landed at was supposedly functioning, but nobody had an access card for it. Even the dealership that it was at, nobody knew how it operated. Nobody knew. Nobody had a card for it. And then it was essentially a comedy of errors. We were sent from place to place, anecdotal evidence, there's a charge point over here, there's a charge point over here. Charging databases were incorrect, charging networks not working with one another, automakers thinking that one dealership has a rapid charger when they don't. Sometimes even representatives from the automakers telling us, oh yes, this charging station is working, and arriving and discovering it wasn't. We turned around, essentially, having got halfway into Belgium, and came back. Now, this is not uncommon. I've been talking to people since who've been having trouble with these charging networks across Europe. And John, I know there's been problems in the US as well. So do we think that these problems are going to cause dramatic problems with electric vehicles, or are we going to roll back on what we've always said, actually, that electric cars are not meant for long distance trips and we were the fools to do it in the first place?
Well, I think people are going to take electric cars on long distance trips, whether or not that's what they're meant for. People do like to test the limits of their cars, and there's certainly still a proof point where you can say, look, in fact, with a bit of pre-planning, I was able to do this trip in the car, and it was much more pleasant, and it's eminently doable, and so on. Tesla seems to be the sort of case study for that at the moment, with their single cross-country route and more to come. So I think, whether or not that's what they're designed for, people will do it. People do all sorts of things with cars that they're not designed to do. But there are clearly going to be teething troubles along the way. And I think what it points out is the incredibly scattershot nature of all of the different public and private, local, regional, and national entities that are sort of putting in these charging stations here, there, and everywhere.
Right.
We don't have a single charging system for them. In Europe, actually, you're worse off than we are because you have a couple of different standards. But, again, you sort of contrast to Tesla, which controls its entire ecosystem, built and operates all of their supercharging stations just for their customers. And it's a much more consistent, predictable experience than when you have to paste together a sort of an effective network out of entries into smartphone apps with notes on the latest state of a particular charger in a place you've never been to.
Right.
So,
yeah.
It is definitely teething troubles, but I think people are going to do these trips anyway.
Well, it's interesting also to note that the corporation trying to get all these different networks to work together is really tough, and we'll come to that later in a second, in another story in this first segment. But a couple of weeks ago, Nissan lost a charge partner, didn't it? In its Easy Charge program. I know we've talked about it before, but you've covered this in depth, so I want to avail myself of the opportunity to kind of revisit that story as you're on the show.
Well, Nissan had announced a promotional special, essentially called No Charge to Charge, wherein if you buy a new Nissan Leaf between starting April 1st of this year, you got 2 years of free charging under certain circumstances. I think a maximum of 30 minutes at a Chademo charger. I forget what the max was for level 2. But basically they were saying, look, we'll pick up the charging. And as part of that, they created this thing called the Easy Charge card, which was meant to be a single access card for 4 different networks. ChargePoint, the former Blink network, now owned by Car Charging Systems, AeroVironment, and, oh, hell, I'm forgetting the 4th one. Anyway, literally hours before they unveiled the design of the card at an electric vehicle show, ChargePoint pulled out because they maintained that they weren't comfortable handing over their customer data to one of their competitors. Oh, of course, the 4th one is NRG, whose EVgo network is expanding quickly, especially in California. However, when I've tried to follow up on the story, I reported on that one from the event, no one is talking. So it's my strong suspicion that actually there's still a lot of horse trading going on behind the scenes. I think in the end, there's a good possibility ChargePoint will come back in with a lot of lawyering to work out mutually acceptable terms, contracts, and so on. But it does highlight, and we also talked about Japan, where there is now a government program to do a single access card for Japanese charging network stations as well. And it points out the fact that right now you have to do a lot of work if you're an electric car driver who wants to roam amongst all of these charging stations that you don't have to do if you're looking for gasoline or diesel fuel for a combustion car.
And we might as well touch on the Japanese story. I know it's not next in the list, but we can flip these two round. One of the things we experienced when we turned up at a gas station in the middle of Belgium, in a place where there was listed as a Tesla Roadster charger, a Type 2 charger, a slow kind of household outlet charging plug, and also a CHAdeMO quick charge. And it was listed as having, open 7 days a week. It wasn't 24-hour, but it was listed as open 7 days a week. And we arrived, unfortunately, on Himmelfahrt, which is the German Day of Ascension in the Christian calendar. And they close everything. The gas station was closed. The gas pumps were operating because they had, credit card authorization systems attached to them. The charging station required you to go inside the gas store and buy a prepaid card that you then used to power the unit. But of course, the gas station was closed. So while the unit was there and it was operating, we couldn't use it because we didn't have any way to pay for the electricity that we needed to use. And this is a massive problem. And this is why the Japanese network is called, it's not a very inspiring name, Nippon Charge Network, Nippon Network Charge or Charge Network, I think.
Like that, yeah.
The idea is it's all the 4 Japanese automakers, the big ones. So it's Toyota, Nissan, Honda, and Mitsubishi, all working together with some money from the Japanese Development Bank to the tune of 800 million. Does that sound right, John? $800 million?
I'd have to look that up. That sounds a bit high. But there's a perfectly good payment mechanism already. And it's one of the head scratchers in the field, not only here in the States, but also in Europe and Japan. Why can't you just use a credit card in the same way you do in a petrol pump? In the States, the answer turned out to be because some of the national government funding for installing these charging stations required collection of data, so that effectively the stations were being subsidized and rolled out for all electric car users. But in return, they gathered data about state of charge, how often someone charged. So you had to have these individual IDs to be part of each individual network.
Right. Right.
I keep drawing the parallel to mobile phone networks. They had to work out roaming, and that was painful and time-consuming. But in 1997, when I got my first mobile phone, there were roaming charges that appeared on my bill. None of all that's gone now, and it's just sort of seamless networks. Everything's been rolled up. I would hope the same applies to charging networks. The problem being there's really not a business model for selling electricity, at least level 2 stations, and it's kind of unclear whether there's going to be one even for DC quick charging like CHAdeMO. So,
and the other thing to bear in mind is that I mean, it's like you say. I mean, my first cell phone was 1998. I was given it as part of a credit card deal that they sell to freshmen essentially at university, and it was 49 pence per minute for a call, and it was prepay. And of course now you pay like you can pay £5 a month and get hundreds of free minutes.
Yeah.
But with these networks. Oh, by the way, it was 800,000 US rather than 800 million. I've just checked it.
Yeah, that sounds.
And these automakers had to all agree to put money in the pot.
Mm-hmm.
And they essentially are going to operate in this mobile phone style. So they will collect a bill, I presume, once a month from the registered users. They will collect payment based on your details. You swipe your card. That details how long you've been charging. You then pay your bill every month. And the people who own the charging stations. So if you're a restaurant and you want to have a charging station, or you're a 7-Eleven, lots of Japanese 7-Elevens have CHAdeMO quick charging. The owner of that store gets the money from Nippon Charge Services, not from the customer. So, this is effectively acting as an intermediary between the car companies, the charging providers themselves, the people who own the charging stations, the people who install the charging stations, and the drivers. And because they're all working together, I'm hoping that they can put some pressure on those who aren't providing reliable service. So I think this is only a good thing. But would it ever work in the US? Because I know we talked about this a little bit this week, and you wrote a very good article saying, would it work in the US? And I think we're of a similar opinion that to do that would be pretty difficult, wouldn't it?
It would. I've always maintained that level 2 charging is going to end up like Wi-Fi is today. Some places you have to pay for it if you're in an airport, or some airports. Other places they provide it as an amenity. Some stores or coffee shops or whatever provide it as an amenity. I think level 2 charging will be free in some places and you'll pay a fee for it in others. But I can get Wi-Fi anywhere with my credit card. That's not the case today with a lot of the charging stations out there in the US. You can't actually use a credit card, or it's cumbersome in the extreme. But I don't think you'll have a single centralized system. Remember that in Japan, the government exerts an enormous amount of quiet behind-the-scenes pressure on the automakers to follow the industrial policy that everyone has sort of collectively set out. So I expect this to work fairly well in Japan long before you have a single unified system, if ever, either in individual European countries or in the States. But you don't really need a single unified system if you can just use your damn charge card.
Yes, that's true. That is true. And it's also worth noting that in Germany, a similar policy is being proposed. This kind of nationwide charging rollout across Germany for electric vehicles. The problem there is that the automakers on board there are all German automakers, and they are very aggressively pushing the combined charge standard, the CCS, Combo 1 or Combo 2, I can't remember which one it is, charge standard, which all German-made electric vehicles are going to start using for DC rapid charging. And they don't want actively discouraging the German government from investing in CHAdeMO quick charge standards, which means anybody with a Nissan Leaf, a Mitsubishi i-MiEV, or even something like the Mitsubishi Outlander are going to be at a massive disadvantage. So there are some protectionist behaviors going on, but I think ultimately every country needs to have this nationwide charging network, or at least to have, rules. What people don't realize is there are very strict rules, aren't there, about the way that gas stations are owned and operated, both in Europe and in the US.
Yes, and actually, although the names of the oil companies are on the lit signs, most oil companies have sort of sloughed off I believe they call it downstream distribution, to companies that do nothing but operate the vendors of salty snack foods and sugary sodas and newspapers and magazines and hot sandwiches that also happen to sell gasoline to get you in there in the first place.
That's true.
But anyway, yeah, it's, people will paste it together. I think the interesting question for me is Nissan has made more electric cars than anyone else. As of the end of April, it was 115,000. Globally, it'll be more this month. The question is, will Nissan end up in certain places or globally having to say, right, we are by far the largest user of CHAdeMO quick charging and always will be. And so we are going to take over wherever we can the CHAdeMO network. You know, a large number of the CHAdeMO quick chargers in the States now are at Nissan dealers.
Right.
So in effect, there's branding, or at least one step removed. You know, again, do you follow the Tesla model? I think the challenge with CCS, it's fine in Germany, but who the hell is going to be responsible for rolling out CCS chargers in the States?
Oh, I mean, that's going to be the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an interesting theory that you have there with regards to Nissan, John. I've heard several people in the industry postulate a similar theory, and I suspect you have too. I will watch with bated breath. All right, final story of the segment. Finergy, aluminium air battery, demonstrated this week in Montreal, in Canada. Now, this is an interesting one. It's a battery made where the cathode is oxygen from the air. You have a water-based electrolyte, and I say water-based because it's not pure water. I think it's got something else in it as well. And then you've got the anode made of aluminium or aluminum. These batteries cannot be recharged in a conventional sense, but they are incredibly energy dense. They have an incredibly long battery life. The shelf life. They can sit on a shelf for 30 years. As long as you keep the electrolyte separate from the anode. And Finergy put one of these in a converted Citroen this week and demonstrated it in Montreal. It's been around for a while in Israel, where the company's based. But this is an interesting future where instead of having petrol or hydrogen as a range extender, you've actually got a range extender from a hybrid battery pack. And it's something that Tesla's expressed an interest in the past, and a couple of other companies have expressed interest in. Is this just a technology showcase, or do you think this is the way that we're going to be moving in the future?
It may be one way we move. I always tend to want to remind people that it's about 10 years between the first sort of bench test results that show promise and anything actually rolling out in production cars. So if you figure that aluminum air batteries have been researched for, I don't know, say 5 years, and they've had this running car for a year,
right.
We're looking at several years still until you can walk into a store or a dealership and actually buy a car with an aluminum air battery. The reason they were in Quebec actually was because there are large deposits of aluminum precursor ore, and there's a large aluminum industry in Quebec, powered largely by hydro energy, which is a fairly low carbon way to get the very large amounts of energy you need to make virgin aluminum for the first time. Recycling cans is much less carbon intensive.
And
but,
it's all... sorry,
you know, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, one of my readers sent me a note pointing out that a couple of different entities had essentially decided that they weren't going to research aluminum air batteries anymore. Clearly, there are still a lot of people who are doing that. There's been some discussion about dual carbon batteries. We're going to see an enormous amount of money spent and research done and prototypes built of different energy storage devices for different purposes, simply because I think everybody recognizes, you know, cars will run on electricity increasingly.
And
how
even
it'll
if
play out, I'm not that analyst.
But it's an interesting one to watch, and there are some problems, as people said. The carbon dioxide produced, the byproduct, actually corrodes the aluminum, so that can cause problems. These individual cells only have a range of about 10 miles. You have to put quite a few of them together to get a decent range extension. So, you know, it's an interesting one to see. Let's have an ad break. If you're watching live, there won't be one. If you're watching the stream afterwards, there should be one. Lots of people saying, we have never seen an ad. I'm not responsible for putting the ads in. I tell YouTube where they go, and YouTube decides whether it's going to put them in or not. So don't feel bad if you don't see one. Second part coming up. All right. So John Voelcker from Green Car Reports, Tesla's annual shareholder meeting this week with the obviously with CEO Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk cannot keep his mouth shut when talking in public, and it's a bit of an ongoing joke. That if you want Elon Musk to say something, give him a glass of wine. I think that was after the Tesla event in California last year. He had a bottle of wine given to him on stage, and a couple of sips later, he was saying interesting things. I'm making no comment. But a very sober Elon Musk and a very tired Elon Musk, didn't you think, John? Was talking at the shareholder meeting this time. And he was asked some interesting questions. So I'm going to go through the list. The first one that I wanted to talk about, although this didn't happen in the order, I'm not talking about this chronologically. The first one was somebody came up and asked him a question. You know, obviously you want everyone in electric vehicles, but you're also the CEO of Tesla Motors. How do you kind of balance that? You know, the wish to have electric vehicles, everyone driving electric vehicles, and the wish to make money for Tesla. And he was very, very honest about it. And he said, look, we are a small car company. Our output doesn't even register in percents. They need to dramatically improve their output, even to get one over from the decimal places, as he said. In order for electric vehicles to really take off, other people are going to have to do things as well. And then he kind of paused. And he paused for quite a while. And he seemed to be having this internal debate as to, do I say anything? And then eventually he said, but I'm about to do something fairly controversial with the Tesla patents. And that's all he said. With your analyst hat on, do you think this is just Elon Musk giving us some lovely spin? Or do you think Tesla really is about to maybe give away some of its patents, release some of the information about battery technology or charging? What was that? Was it a throwaway comment or something more serious?
I imagine that they are very much looking at ways to solidify their position. And for any Silicon Valley startup company, which they are, even if they happen to make autos, which is sort of a non-obvious thing for venture capital to fund, one of the revenue streams is always licensing of intellectual property. And clearly, Tesla has the fastest DC rapid charging going right now, and an interesting approach to battery packs that no one else is using. So it is entirely possible that if Tesla felt it could both make money and solidify its technology as an industry standard, then it might well license patents or possibly place one or more of them into the public domain.
Yeah.
There's actually precedent. Think back to 1975 and the catalytic converter,
right,
when the US EPA laid down exhaust emission standards for the first time. They were a huge hurdle for car makers to get to. Honda created a very complex engine called the CVCC that used different combustion processes, but General Motors created the first catalytic converter, which used precious metals as catalysts to make some of the after treatment work properly, reduce the carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons. Or is it NOx? Anyway, but they actually, if I remember my history correctly, placed that patent into the public domain and let other automakers use that technology without licensing fees in order to allow the industry to comply with the first round of exhaust emission standards. So I could imagine Tesla doing that with one or more specific patents, both to establish its technology and possibly to bring down the cost of some of the components.
Yeah.
Because if GM rolls out its 200-mile, $30,000 electric car at some point in the next 4 years, they will want some of the same functionality that Tesla has. And if GM can bang out 100,000 of those a year down the road, that's more cars than Tesla's making right now. And if you double the production, the price of the part comes down.
Yeah, and so, I think that also, I think that also works with the batteries, because Tesla's, you know, talking up this gigafactory. And if Tesla can get everybody to switch over to the 1850 cells that they use in
18650.
18650 cells. If Tesla can convince the automotive industry to move to those small capacity, massively paralleled packs. So how they work is they have, you know, strings of small capacity cells in series and then parallel those up, as opposed to what other automakers do, which is make larger capacity cells and string those together to make the pack. then Tesla has got instant custom for its Gigafactory.
Yes, although I would argue that it might make more sense for them to do other types of components, be they power electronics or onboard chargers or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not at all convinced that other automakers are going to use the thousands of 18650s that Tesla is.
Yeah.
It could happen, certainly. But Tesla seems to think that it will need all of the Gigafactory capacity for itself.
Yes.
And in fact, one of the things that came out of the meeting was that Toyota, there was a lot of sort of misreporting a couple of weeks ago about the end of the RAV4 EV contract. But Tesla said Toyota had actually asked it to do a bigger battery electric vehicle program to follow the RAV4 EV. And Tesla said essentially, sorry, we're capacity limited. We need those batteries for our own cars. No thanks.
Right.
So
it's an interesting angle that Tesla is taking towards the future. Talking of future models, one thing which struck me as interesting was Musk admitting that the Model X is designed for women, and almost that it's a women's car, whereas the S is very much a guy's car. Now, this might just be an auto industry thing in the US, and I can understand why the SUV model would be more appealing to women, especially if you have, the soccer mum trope. But it was interesting to say, wasn't it, that the Model X is going to get a few tweaks before it goes into production, and it's been designed with women more in mind than men.
It is a family vehicle, clearly. In the States, at least, families which used to buy station wagons now buy crossovers or SUVs. This is Tesla's crossover. And family structures and gender roles being what they are, often the people who are ferrying the family around are the women in conventional families. So it's not surprising that they're doing that. I have to say anecdotally, not based on a representative data set, every single Model S owner that I have come across, with the exception of the woman who races, is a guy.
Yeah, that's true.
And, for the family vehicle, generally in conventional families, or male-female couples, families, whatever the appropriate term is, the woman ends up being the decision maker on the car.
Yeah.
And so it's perfectly logical. They want to sell as many Model X's as they can. It's going to be an expensive vehicle. I think it'll be pricier than the Model S. And so to sell $100,000 electric crossovers, they've got to be absolutely as desirable as they can.
They've got to be spot on. Also, the other quick bit of information is that we had confirmation that Ford was the reason why Tesla dropped the Model E. It was speculated. You were one of those who said, well, Ford trademarked it. That has now been confirmed. It's not really a surprise. But the reason that Ford obviously didn't like the fact that Tesla had tried to trademark the Model E, or had trademarked the Model E, Ford wants it. I don't know what Ford's going to do with it, but we'll wait and find out, I guess. You wrote a very good piece this week, John, about Tesla, and I'm afraid I'm not going to give you much time to talk about it, but maybe you can give us a 50,000 foot rundown.
Sure.
You wrote a very interesting piece this week saying, it's not just about keeping owners and shareholders happy, it's about volume. Tesla needs to sell 6 million cars to make history. Tell us why.
As an automotive historian, part-time here and there, I like to look for parallels in the industry. And I've said, Musk actually repeated something that I think I first said, which was that no one has started a car company from scratch in the US whose brand has survived for 90 years. It was Walter P. Chrysler in December 1924. A lot of people have tried, and the famous ones are Tucker and DeLorean and Bricklin and Fisker, and he's beaten all of those folks. Tesla's made about 50,000 cars. None of them even crossed 10,000. So Tesla's already beaten them, but there's one entrepreneur that he has not beaten. And he's largely forgotten now, but he's one of the most famous industrialists of the US of the 20th century. His name was Henry J. Kaiser. And in 1945, as the US started to come out of World War II, starved for cars, he started a car company called Kaiser Frazer. And in its 10 years of life, or 9 years of production, from 1947 to 55, Kaiser made 750,000 cars at a time when the global auto market was only about 10 million cars each year across the country. It's now 8 times that large. We sell about 80 million cars a year. So if you simply run the numbers and say, can Tesla get to the scale of cars proportionally that Kaiser got to, you get to Tesla has to make 6 million cars to do the same task that Henry J. Kaiser did and didn't succeed at because the company's not around. The only surviving piece of it is Jeep, which has passed through many owners. Tesla has to get to 6 million vehicles. I should also add one final sentence. I'm rather pleased with the article. It took a while to gel.
Yeah, it's a great article.
I sort of like laying out these historic things because people tend to be very, very short-term focused when they look at the electric vehicle industry. But I should point out, Tesla has clearly already made history.
Yes,
and I wasn't saying, Tesla is nothing until they make 6 million cars. Clearly, they've done an enormous number of things, which many people, including myself, thought were so hard as to be virtually impossible. So all kudos to Tesla. But still, Henry J. Kaiser stands out there, and he did something that Tesla has not reached. So that was what the article was.
And there's a very interesting. I'm just going to finish that with the paragraph that you said is in Wikipedia. Kaiser suffered the ultimate fate of all independent American auto manufacturers in the post-war period. While sales were initially strong because of car-starved public, the company did not have the resources to survive long-term competition with GM, Ford, and Chrysler. So essentially, your argument is Tesla has to go to Detroit, or at least beat Detroit, in order to survive.
Well, and I think the interesting question is, the public is starved right now, you might make the argument, for the kind of cars that Tesla is providing. A number of the critics of the article said, look, Kaiser was competing directly in the mass market, which is true. Tesla is not. Tesla is competing at the high end of the market today, and they're making a kind of car that no one else offers and won't for a while. But fast forward 10 years, if we go to the 2025 model year, it seems to me quite likely that GM and Ford and Chrysler, not to mention BMW and Daimler and Volkswagen Group, and possibly the Japanese by then, will all be making battery electric vehicles with 200 or 300 mile ranges at affordable prices. And then can Tesla compete as a small automaker that simply has to pay more money for smaller volumes of parts than car makers who are making 10 million cars a year?
Yeah, it's true. All right, on to the next segment. One of the reasons we get you on at the beginning of every month, John, and you may have realized this, is that you do the most amazing rundowns of sales figures. And I know that you have a chart on your wall with lists of all the car sales figures that you have. And one of the reasons why at Transport Evolved we don't do sales figures is because Green Car Reports does them so amazingly, we're just not going to even bother. But John, it's been a really good sales month. May was a really good sales month for electric vehicles, the best yet, in fact, for a lot of vehicles. The one that stands out is the Chevy Volt. It's still it doesn't seem to be selling as well as the Leaf. For many months it was neck and neck, and this year we've seen a clear trend. The Volt has lagged substantially, hasn't it?
Yeah, the Volt reached its sales volume really in about 2012, and it hasn't significantly changed since then. Whereas Nissan, with US production increasing, with more cells available, and with a CEO who is 110% devoted to making a battery electric car a global success, Nissan is just turning up the heat constantly. Our best information, not confirmed by General Motors, but our best information is that we will see a revised Volt at the January 2015 Detroit Auto Show, which is really only 7 months away. It will be a 2016 model year car. It will probably come out sometime mid next year, and it will likely be restyled, either cheaper or better capacity. Ideally, it will at least break even for General Motors, which means that it's been re-engineered to use cheaper, higher volume parts. With luck, it'll have 5 seats. But really, I think you might say General Motors is just keeping the Volt model line on sustenance right now. They may also be having a little problem because California is temporarily out of green stickers, and so there is less incentive. Although I should point out that the Toyota Prius plug-in did gangbusters in May. So, there's a lot of noise level month to month, but clearly, as you started out, May was a stupendous month. We sold about 12,500 cars with plugs in the US, depending on Tesla,
and
which doesn't.
Part of that was down to the BMW i3 coming on the market.
Strong performance, 330.
But it's going to be interesting to see how that changes. As these cars come. I anticipate that we're going to see very, very strong sales from BMW for several months because of just literally the number of vehicles that BMW is actually getting into the US, and it's very different to the launch of the Leaf and the Volt, where we had very, very low figures, because the US was not the first launch market for the i3. Production in Germany is already really quite steaming along, and so all those vehicles are coming over. It's going to be an interesting year, I think, moving forward with sales, and I'm very keen to see what happens next. But the final story of this segment, 8 US states this week put in writing for the first time. Their governors had agreed back late last year, but this is the first time that they're saying, look, we're going to work together. We're going to essentially adopt a unified set of standards across all 8 states. Now, this is the interesting thing. It's California and Oregon. No guesses, really. We were not surprised that those 2 states had joined up. But then a whole bunch of East Coast states, John.
Although, in the US, a state can either have adopt the national emission standards or the California standards, which are tougher. And there are, I forget, something like 12 or 14 states that have adopted all or some of California's emission standards. And the Northeast has a large number of them. The Northeast has always been more progressive. And I think, if I had to summarize that announcement in one sentence, because we'll see how it actually plays out when stuff starts happening that affects drivers' lives. This was a press conference. What it means is essentially, hey, look, we can do California too. They've seen that it works in California. California has a lot of penetration of cars with plugs. And, the Northeast states who've already got the California standards want to help propagate electric cars. They work in the Northeast, especially in some of the more crowded city areas. They want to do what California has done on a regional basis. And ultimately, you'll have California plus Oregon and ideally plus Washington above that. So, it's really just following what California has been pioneering for 10 years plus.
And we're talking about HOV lane access, although HOV lane's less popular on the East Coast. I know you see them around DC, but less so as you go northeast. We're also going to potentially, we should note that this doesn't just mean electric vehicles. It also means other zero-emission vehicles. So we could be talking hydrogen fuel cells as well. Let's have a quick ad break. We'll be right back for the third part. So we're back for the third part. I'm sorry we're rushing through this a little bit today. Because of our time constraints, John and I are both a bit time constrained today. We're just kind of pushing through the show, and there's no Mark. So, Hyundai. Their first fuel cell vehicles made landfall in the US last week. The Tucson FCV fuel cell vehicle. It's kind of a compact utility vehicle. It's a weird one, based on obviously the popular gasoline model, but only going to be sold in fairly limited numbers, or rather leased in limited numbers. $499 a month in California only. And Hyundai came out this week and went, we're really only doing it for the zero emission vehicle credits in California, and we're going to lose money on every one.
This shouldn't be a shock to anyone who's been following the industry, though.
No.
Well,
it's nice to have them being honest about it, John. I think that's the reason why I'm picking us up as a story, because normally automakers don't.
Folks like you and I tend to write that anyway.
Yes.
So, I hadn't realized sort of the hoo-ha that would ensue when I wrote the article 2 years ago now about compliance cars. What's a compliance car? It's low volume. It's only sold in certain areas. It's sold in just enough numbers to meet the zero emission vehicle regulations. This is simply a different way to do that, just like the Fiat 500e or the Chevy Spark EV or the Toyota RAV4 EV or the Honda Fit EV. This is a low volume car that is being sold only in limited areas because you have the added problem of you can't sort of walk up to your nearest gas station and get hydrogen as fuel.
No.
But it's going to be sold in very low numbers to meet those same California ZEV rules. But fuel cell vehicles get more points. Right. So you need to sell fewer of them under those ZEV rules. Ideally, or sort of theoretically, because a fuel cell vehicle can refuel for 300 more miles in 10 minutes or less, which no battery electric vehicle, even including the Model S, can do at this moment. And so that's the reason why the California Air Resources Board gave them more points. But yes, it's the first of a number of compliance vehicles. There will be a Toyota fuel cell vehicle and a Honda fuel cell vehicle. They too will be sold in compliance numbers. Toyota is now saying that even after 2020, they're only going to sell something like 20 or 25,000 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles a year globally. So these are going to be very low volume vehicles for quite a while, by which time I would rather expect that there might be something like 1 million battery electric vehicles being built.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
And the other thing to note very quickly about this is that the interview process is very much like it was for the EV1. You have to have, I've heard stories that in order to get one of these vehicles, you have to almost go through a psych evaluation to make sure you're the right kind of person to drive these vehicles. So it's not for everyone. Quadricycle safety. We've talked about this before, both on and off air. Quadricycles are a weird category of vehicle in Europe. Depending on which country you're in, light quadricycles, really lightweight ones, can be driven without a driver's license in certain parts of France and in other European countries. Not in the UK. You have to have a moped license to drive them if they're limited to 45 kilometers an hour, and you have to have a car or motorbike license to drive the more powerful ones. But Euro NCAP this week, which is essentially the European version of NHTSA and the IIHS combined, published a really scathing crash test report of the Renault Twizy and other quadricycles. It did 3 electric vehicles and 1 gasoline vehicle. And out of a possible 16 points, the Renault Twizy came top with 6 points because it had an airbag and it did have some sort of crumple zone. And essentially Euro NCAP is going, look, these vehicles are currently on the road. They have to pass the same type approval as motorcycles, but that's it. There's no requirement for them to have any other safety features. They are sharing the road with big, powerful, heavy vehicles like lorries and cars who can go far faster and hurt when you hit them. What do we think is going to happen? And Renault, really pushed the Twizy when it brought it into the marketplace and said, look, we've designed it to be crash test worthy, etc., etc., etc. This is clearly not the reality.
The US has a parallel, though. They're called neighborhood electric vehicles or low-speed vehicles.
Yes.
And honestly, you can think of them as sort of gussied-up golf carts. But in the States, generally, there are rules about which roads they can go on. Usually, they're only allowed on roads with speed limits of 25 miles an hour or less, depending. There are lots of different local laws affecting them, which is one of the challenges here. But, in large part, a lot of those cars in the States are on limited access roads, and you don't actually have large commercial trucks or sort of gigantic full-size SUVs on those same roads. They're in retirement communities. They're in sort of expanded golf course road networks, things like that. Europe is not quite like that, and I understand completely why Euro NCAP is proposing what it is. I don't know how it'll come out. In the end, in Green Car Reports, we made a decision. We weren't going to spend a lot of time covering those vehicles. They're not real cars. They can't do everything either functionally or legally that people buy vehicles to do. and they've never been a particularly big segment here.
Yeah.
In European cities and possibly Asian cities, different story. But yeah, I go back to the story you wrote for us, 4 years ago about the Gee Whiz that crashed. So
split in half. And I should point out, I used to own a Renault Twizy, and one of the reasons I sold it very quickly, and I don't think I was very public about it at the time, was I got involved in a rear shunt. I shunted someone very slowly. I was only doing about 10 miles an hour. I ran into the back of a Land Rover, and it twisted the frame of the vehicle. And at that point, I kind of went, wow, I'm taking my kids in this. So there we go. Moving on, 2 more stories to go, John. We're nearly there. The EPA this week announced plans essentially under presidential executive powers, kind of the final hurrah of the Obama administration, to try and green up the US electrical grid. That obviously means electric cars are going to get greener too. 30% reduction in carbon emissions from coal-fired power plants by 2030 was one of the figures given. But it's going to make a difference to EV owners if it happens, and if some of the cap and trade schemes that they are talking about doing to try and encourage people to generate greener electricity, as well as reduce polluting sources of electricity generation. But you wrote a very interesting article this week about why the EPA is actually going to be in for a fight, and I kind of agree with you on this.
Well, the interesting thing, I should point out that I'm not convinced this was the final hurrah of the Obama administration, which still has 2 years left to go. Congressional gridlock is so bad in this country.
It may not happen.
It's doing more and more of the things that it wants to do where possible via executive orders, rule changes, agency policies, and so forth. But the rules that the EPA issued, which they had been expected to issue for a couple of years now, under the mandate from the US Supreme Court that said not only is carbon dioxide an emission, but the EPA must regulate it. Not just that they legally can, but that they have to. These rules arguably are going to make the biggest difference to overall US carbon emissions of anything that any government entity can do. There's been a huge fight over the Keystone XL pipeline here. Some of the analyses I've seen say its impact is not going to be huge on overall carbon. It would be slightly increased. Its impact is dwarfed by the reductions proposed by these rules. As a number of commentators have pointed out, every time any new emission regulation is proposed, there is shrieking and hollering and moaning and breastbeating and tearing of hair over how it is going to destroy the economy, cause every job in the country to move overseas where they don't have all those icky regulations, consumers millions and millions of dollars and so on. Almost none of that comes to pass. It turns out that regulating emissions often saves companies money, or the best guess estimates by smart people turn out to have been too high. But there is now a body of thought in the States that say that by the end of our lifetimes, the electricity utility business and power grid here is going to be vastly different, because the utility industry, as I said itself, distributed renewable energy, the solar panels on your house tied to a used Nissan Leaf battery pack, are going to destroy the business model they've operated on for 100 years, which is basically they build an expensive, complicated grid and then sell you a predictable amount of power over it every month. If you're getting some chunk of your power locally, but they still have to pay to keep the grid going for your emergencies, that is not a business model that they will survive under. Plus, you're looking at this notion that coal may sit in the ground. It may, in fact, just not be used and not even be shipped to China. It may be that 50 years hence, much of the globe no longer burns coal to generate electricity. We burn cleaner things, or we get renewables. But there will still be enormous fighting over these EPA regulations, basically because A, it's regulations, and there is a part of our body politic and elected officials who think that any regulation for any reason whatsoever is evil. B, it's the Obama administration. There's a part of our electorate and elected officials who think that Obama is evil and wicked and so forth. In the end, these regulations will likely stick. And frankly, utilities have wanted to know under what regime they're going to have to make very long-term capital investments, and now they know. And the answer is start to retire coal power plants. The TVA is already doing that, the Tennessee Valley Authority. And, you know, they can now plan for 30 years to downplay coal power plants. Finally, I wanted to point out about the regulations. They're very carefully constructed for maximum local flexibility. States, regions can set up cap and trade schemes.
Yep.
You know, utilities can invest entirely in energy usage reduction. You know, if they want to insulate every house in their state, that's an alternative as well, as long as they can produce results that say the carbon is coming down. But this is the big fight to watch.
And it also means that states like West Virginia, which literally runs on coal, even today, is still going to be able to support an industry that brings it money and do something that, you know, and it's also going out to a public consultation as well, I believe, at the moment. So there will be some variance, and the final regulations haven't been written yet. Talking of West Virginia, and this is our and finally, and I put this one in because I forgot to do it last week, but also because I knew you were on, John, and this is an historical piece that I know you will enjoy. Charlestown, West Virginia, this weekend is holding its centenary EV sociability run. Now, sociability runs, John, date back to the dawn of the automobile, don't they?
You've got a car, I've got a car, let's go and drive. It's basically a meetup on wheels.
Yes. It's the equivalent. It's kind of the I suppose the modern day equivalent will be Cars and Croissants or Cars and Coffee that runs over various different places in the US. It's a chance to look at other people's cars. It's a chance to talk cars and take part. Now, unfortunately, registration is ended, but this weekend, June 7th, which is tomorrow, 10 a.m., Charlestown, West Virginia, is going to be the start of the 100th year celebrations for the EV sociability run. There's a very, very great photograph here in the article from a 1915 report entitled The Educational Value of Sociability Runs. And I think that kind of puts it into perspective. It's camaraderie, it's learning about your vehicle by talking to other people who also have a vehicle like yours. And I think it's brilliant. I hope to see more of these. And if you are in West Virginia, you really should go and watch and support these guys, because it's fantastic. And it reminds us that electric cars are not new. They've been around for quite some time. Thank you very much for joining us this week, John.
Thanks for having me.
greencarreports.com every day.
Absolutely.
And we'll be back next week, hopefully with Mr. Mark Chatterley in tow. Thanks very much for joining us, everybody. And as always, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.